Carved stones older than farming, endless rows that don't lead anywhere, massive circles built far from any town, and blocks so heavy even modern machines would struggle to move them. These are ancient megalithic structures that shouldn't exist. The Karnak stones stretch out across the land. In western France, over 3,000 tall stones are lined up in long rows that go on for miles. Most of them were put in place between 4,500 and 3,300 BCE, which makes them older than Stonehenge. Some of the stones are taller than a one-story building, others are smaller, and the spacing between them slowly changes as the rows continue. That wasn't careless work. Archaeologists believe the layout was planned very carefully, even if we no longer understand what the planning behind it actually meant. There's no giant temple or tomb at Karnak, which makes it harder to explain. It doesn't clearly mark graves, and it doesn't sit next to a major settlement. Whatever was happening here wasn't about living space. So what are the stones for then? Ceremony? Marking something? Who knows? But setting up this many stones would have taken years of work and a lot of people. Each stone had to be dug out, moved, stood upright, and secured so it wouldn't fall. So there was some sort of meaning behind these things. If you walked past Rajam El Hiri on the ground, you might not even notice it. It looks like piles of dark rock spread across an open field, but from above, it looks like Deep Space Nine crashed to the ground. The site was built around 3000 BCE using tens of thousands of stones carefully stacked without cement or glue. In the center is a large mound, which may have been added later, possibly for burial. Some of the gaps between the stones line up perfectly with the sunrise on the longest day of the year, so the layout was not random. What's missing is a nearby town. There's no sign that large numbers of people lived close enough to, conveniently build something like this. That means people traveled here, worked together, and then left when it was done. Not very practical. So whatever it was used for, it must have been very important to them. The Ganchina temples in Malta were already ancient when the pyramids were being built. They date back to 3600 to 3200 BCE, and they're some of the oldest stone buildings still standing today. People later believed that giants built them, mostly because the stones are so big, it's hard to imagine normal people moving them. Some of the blocks weigh over 50 tons, yet they were lifted and placed without metal tools or wheels. The builders shaped the stones so they fit together tightly, creating thick walls and rooms that have survived for thousands of years. The layout is carefully planned. The temples have rounded rooms connected by narrow walkways, and archaeologists found animal bones and carved figures inside. These likely were not homes. They were built for special events. Seems like rituals may have taken place here. Whatever methods they used to build them, though, they clearly worked, even without the tools that you'd expect to need to create a place like this. From the outside, Bernanès looks like a long, low hill sitting near the coast of Brittany, but this hill was actually constructed, and a very long time ago, around 4500 BCE. That makes it older than Stonehenge and also older than the pyramids. It's one of the earliest large stone monuments ever discovered in Europe. Inside, it's packed with stone passageways and burial chambers. There are 11 separate chambers, all built using stacked stone, and the entire thing stretches over 230 feet long. To build it, people moved and stacked thousands of tons of rocks, shaping a massive monument without cement or metal tools. Some of the stones inside are carved with simple symbols as well, so this wasn't just a pile of rocks thrown together. There was some sort of meaning behind it. Archaeologists believe it was used as a burial site for important people, possibly over many generations. It's amazing something like this still exists, though. At the time, people were still figuring out farming, yet here they were, organizing large groups to build something that's still standing to this day.
A lost dog led to finding artwork older than civilization itself. In September 1940, 4 teenage boys were exploring the countryside near Montiac, France, when their dog disappeared down a hole in the ground. As they widened the opening to rescue it, they uncovered the entrance to a vast underground cave system. What they found inside stunned the world. The walls and ceilings of the cave were covered in more than 600 painted animals and thousands of engraved figures. Bulls, horses, deer, bison, and abstract symbols rendered with incredible precision and movement. These paintings became known as the Lascaux cave paintings. Scientists dated the artwork to roughly 17,000 years ago during the Upper Paleolithic period. The artists used mineral pigments, charcoal, and sophisticated techniques like shading, perspective, and contouring, skills that were once believed impossible for early humans. This discovery shattered the idea that prehistoric people were intellectually primitive. Instead, it revealed complex symbolic thinking, ritual behavior, and artistic mastery. Sadly, human breath and artificial lighting began damaging the paintings, forcing authorities to close the cave to the public. Today though, exact replicas allow visitors to experience what was found by pure chance. In 1799, during Napoleon Bonaparte's campaign in Egypt, French soldiers were reinforcing Fort Julien near the town of Rosetta when they uncovered a black stone slab embedded in a wall. The stone was covered in inscriptions written in 3 scripts: Ancient Greek, Demonic Egyptian, and hieroglyphics. While hieroglyphics had remained undeciphered for over 1400 years, scholars could still read the Greek. This made the Rosetta Stone the key to finally translating the language of ancient Egypt. In the years that followed, linguists, most famously Jean-François Champollion, used the stone to crack the hieroglyphic code. Suddenly, temple walls, tomb inscriptions, and monuments across Egypt could be read for the very first time. The accidental find transformed Egyptology overnight, turning mysterious symbols into readable history and resurrecting the voices of a civilization long thought silent. In 1939, Edith Pretty, the owner of an estate in Suffolk, England, became curious about a series of large mounds of earth on her land. She hired an amateur archaeologist named Basil Brown to investigate it. What Brown uncovered was the ghostly imprint of a 90-foot-long wooden ship buried beneath one of the mounds. Inside was a treasure trove of gold jewelry, ceremonial weapons, armor, silverware, and intricate metalwork. The burial is believed to belong to an Anglo-Saxon king, most likely King Raedwald of East Anglia, dating back to the early 7th century. The era had often been called the Dark Ages and assumed to be culturally primitive. Sutton Hoo proved the opposite, revealing advanced craftsmanship, long-distance trade, and a rich warrior culture. In 1901, Greek sponge divers sheltering from a storm began exploring a shipwreck off the island of Antikythera. Among statues and pottery, they recovered corroded bronze fragments that initially seemed insignificant. Closer examination revealed something astonishing: a complex system of interlocking gears. Modern X-ray imaging revealed over 30 precision-cut gears, a level of mechanical engineering previously thought impossible for the ancient world. Often described as the world's first analog computer, the mechanism forced historians to completely rethink the technological sophistication of ancient Greece. In 1911, American historian Hiram Bingham was searching for the last stronghold of the Inca Empire when local farmers guided him up a steep mountain ridge in the Andes. There, hidden beneath thick jungle vegetation, stood Machu Picchu, a remarkably preserved Inca city abandoned centuries earlier. Although indigenous locals were aware of the ruins, Machu Picchu had been unknown to the outside world. Its accidental reintroduction reshaped global understanding of Inca engineering, astronomy, and urban planning. Today, it stands as one of the most iconic archaeological sites on Earth. The oldest known temple was hiding in plain sight. For decades, farmers in southeastern Turkey noticed large carved stones while plowing their fields. The site was dismissed as medieval rubble until archaeologist Klaus Schmidt examined it in 1994. Göbekli Tepe completely overturned established history. It suggested that organized religion may have existed before settled farming, possibly driving the creation of civilization itself. It is now considered to be one of the most important archaeological discoveries ever made. In November 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter was on the verge of giving up after years of unsuccessful searching in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. Then, while clearing rubble left by ancient workers, his team uncovered a stone step leading downward. At the bottom was the sealed tomb of King Tutankhamun, nearly intact, a rarity among ancient royal burials. The discovery offered an unprecedented look at ancient Egyptian burial practices and sparked global fascination with Egyptology. It remains the most famous archaeological discovery in history, found only because Carter refused to stop digging.
And in the same part of the world, we also have Gavrinus, which sits on a small island off the coast of Brittany. It dates back to around 4200 BCE. From the outside, it looks like a grassy mound. Inside, it's something else entirely. I mean, look at these carvings. It's beautiful. It's a long stone passage that leads to a central chamber, and almost every stone along the way is covered in these carvings. There are spirals and zigzags and other repeated patterns that show up at other sites from the same time. Some of the stones used here were clearly taken from older monuments, which means People were reusing pieces that already held meaning. The passage lines up with the rising sun at certain times of the year, allowing light to travel straight into the chamber. Cavernous wasn't a place people lived though. It was sealed most of the time, probably only open for specific events, which just makes all the effort they put into decorating these stones even more impressive. And now we head to Spain with the Dolmen of Menga, built around 3750 BCE. It's a long stone chamber with a short passage leading inside, but the size of the stones, some of the roof slabs weigh close to 180 tons, making them some of the heaviest stones ever used in an ancient construction like this. Instead of pointing toward the sun or stars like many other sites though, Menga is aligned toward a nearby mountain, which feels deliberate, must have had some sort of spiritual meaning. Inside the chamber, the space is wide and tall, almost cave-like. The stones are so heavy that builders had to add supporting pillars inside just to keep the roof from collapsing. This Sora sits in northern Morocco. It doesn't get nearly the attention it deserves. It's a large stone circle made up of around 167 standing stones, surrounding a central mound of earth. The site dates between the 4th and 3rd century BCE, so it's younger than most of the other sites on the list, but still impressive in scale. One of the stones stands over 16 feet tall, much taller than the rest. Definitely feels like it was meant to be the main marker. The stones are spaced in a way that clearly defines an inside and an outside. As for what the inside was for, we don't really know. Very little digging has been done here, so most of what we have are guesses. What we do know is whoever built it put in a huge amount of effort. Near the ancient Roman ruins at Baalbek in Lebanon, there's a quarry with stone blocks. Some of these things weigh over 1,000 tons. One unfinished block is estimated at around 1,650 tons, making it one of the largest stones ever cut by humans. These blocks were meant to be used in the massive temple complex right next to the quarry, and some of the slightly smaller stones from the same area were actually moved and built into the temple walls. Cutting stones that big is already difficult, but moving them, that's on a completely different level. Even with modern equipment, lifting and transporting something that heavy would not be simple. Yet some of the stones were clearly intended to be moved, and these things are clean and straight. They clearly knew what they were doing. What nobody knows for sure is why they stopped. Maybe the project got scrapped, or maybe they finally hit a limit. These things were just too heavy and had to be left behind. All right, we've talked about some places built around 3,000 to 4,000 BCE. This next site is even older, and by a lot. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey was built around 9,600 BCE. Farming hadn't started yet. Villages just weren't really a thing, and yet somehow people came together to build this massive stone site on top of a hill. The builders cut huge stone pillars straight out of the ground, some weighing as much as a large truck, then dragged them into place and stood them upright. Each circle has 2 tall stones in the middle, with more set up around them. They're also covered in carvings of animals like snakes, wild pigs, birds, and foxes. All of it was done using basic stone tools too. And what's strange is that nobody lived there. Archaeologists didn't find houses, fire pits, or anything like that. That means people traveled here for a reason, did whatever they came to do, and then left. Sometime around 8,000 BCE, the whole site was buried. It wasn't destroyed, obviously, because it's still standing today, but for whatever reason, they wanted it sealed away. The archaeologists who led the early digs believed places like this may have brought people together so often that farming came later just to support gatherings like this. If that's true, it totally changed the way we think of human history. And Stonehenge didn't start as the stone circle people picture today. The first work there began around 3000 BCE, and changes kept happening for hundreds of years. That means generation after generation kept coming back to the same spot, even though they had no written language to pass instructions down. The largest stones weigh about 25 tons, and they were dragged from miles away. Some of the smaller stones came from Wales, which is over 150 miles from the site. Moving them would have taken serious planning and cooperation, especially without metal tools or wheels. The stones are lined up with the sun in a very specific way. On the longest and shortest days of the year, the sun rises or sets right where the stones are pointing. That kind of accuracy doesn't happen by accident, of course. Clearly, they were paying close attention to the sky over long periods of time. Stonehenge also wasn't alone. The land around it is full of burial mounds and pathways, so this area was important long before the stones came to be. Nobody knows exactly what Stonehenge was for, but it clearly mattered enough for people to keep working on it for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Imagine digging a well to find water and instead uncovering an army that's been waiting for over 2,000 years. In March of 1974, farmers in China's Shaanxi province were struggling through a drought and digging a well near the city of Xi'an. As their shovels struck hardened earth, they began pulling up fragments of what looked like broken pottery, but these weren't ordinary shards. They were actually pieces of sculpted human faces, torsos, and bronze weapons. Local officials were alerted, and archaeologists quickly realized the farmers had stumbled onto something monumental: the outer edge of the Terracotta Army, buried beside the mausoleum of Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. Further excavation revealed an underground complex spanning nearly 8 square kilometers. Thousands of life-size clay soldiers stood in strict military formation, complete with infantry, archers, cavalry, generals, horses, and chariots. Each soldier was originally painted in bright colors and armed with real bronze weapons. What shocked researchers most was the individuality. No two faces are exactly the same. Hairstyles, armor styles, facial expressions, and even ear shapes differ, suggesting that these figures have been modeled after real soldiers. The scale of labor required was staggering. Historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of workers spent decades constructing the tomb complex. The discovery rewrote what we know about ancient Chinese organization, craftsmanship, and imperial power. And to this day, much of the emperor's main tomb remains sealed, with reports of mercury rivers beneath it, meaning the Terracotta Army may only be the beginning. Who would have thought that one careless rock throw would change our understanding of ancient religion forever? In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Ed-Dihib was searching the cliffs near the Dead Sea for a lost goat. Hoping to scare the animal out of hiding, he tossed a stone into a small cave opening. Instead of a bleeding goat, he heard the unmistakable sound of pottery shattering. Inside the cave were tall clay jars, some still sealed, containing ancient scrolls wrapped in linen. At first, the shepherd had no idea what he had found. The scrolls were eventually sold to antiquities dealers before scholars realized their immense importance. Known today as the Dead Sea Scrolls, the collection includes over 900 documents written roughly between 300 BCE and 100 CE. They contain some of the oldest surviving copies of books from the Hebrew Bible, along with religious rules, hymns, and previously unknown texts from a Jewish sect believed to be the Essenes. Before this discovery, the earliest known biblical manuscripts dated to around 10th century AD. The scrolls prove that these sacred texts had been preserved with astonishing accuracy for more than 1,000 years. The accidental find revolutionized biblical scholarship, deepened our understanding of early Judaism, and provided critical context for the origins of Christianity. A Roman city vanishes in disaster and re-emerges nearly 17 centuries later. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius violently erupted, burying the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum under layers of ash and pumice. The sudden burial preserved buildings, streets, and even people exactly as they were at the moment of disaster. In 1599, workers digging an underground water channel accidentally uncovered walls covered in frescoes and Latin inscriptions. However, the discovery wasn't fully understood, and the site was reburied. It wasn't until 1748 that systemic excavations began under the Kingdom of Naples. Archaeologists soon realized that they weren't just finding ruins, they were uncovering an entire Roman city that was frozen in time. Pompeii revealed astonishing details of everyday Roman life. Bakeries with bread still in the ovens, graffiti on walls, political slogans, taverns, brothels, and luxurious villas. Plaster casts of victims captured people in their final moments. Families were huddled together, hands were shielding their faces. No other site has provided such an intimate, unfiltered look at ancient daily life. Pompeii transformed archaeology from treasure hunting into a scientific study of past civilizations.
Off the southern coast of Jamaica, at the entrance to what's now Kingston Harbor, there used to be a town called Port Royal that was infamous in the 1600s. It was crowded with sailors, merchants, and most infamously, pirates. People called it one of the most sinful places in the Caribbean. The town sat on this narrow strip of sandy land, packed with wooden houses, brick buildings, and taverns. On June 7th, 1692, a powerful earthquake hit. Because the town was built on this loose, waterlogged sand, the ground kind of just gave away, and then whole streets split apart and large chunks of the town just slid straight into the harbor. And it happened so quickly that a lot of it ended up on the seafloor almost fully intact. Around 2,000 people died in minutes though. Today, parts of Old Port Royal are still underwater in relatively shallow, calm water, so you can go down there and see it. Divers have found some pretty incredible things down there too. Outlines of streets, rooms with objects still in place. A pocket watch stopped near the moment of the quake is one of the more famous finds. On the west coast of India, in a big bay called the Gulf of Khambat, researchers with the National Institute of Ocean Technology ran a survey to study the seafloor. In December of 2000, their equipment picked up patterns that didn't look purely random. Some lines and shapes seemed straight and grid-like, which led a few people to wonder if they were seeing the remains of some ancient town. A few objects, like a piece of old wood and some fragments of material, were pulled up during the work. One date from that wood came back extremely old, 7500 BCE to be exact. So if those patterns really were the remains of buildings and streets, and the date was accurate, it would mean people were building large, organized communities in this area far earlier than most historians thought. But this stretch of sea is a tough place to study. Water is muddy, the currents are very intense, and the seafloor is constantly being stirred up. That makes it easy for natural ridges and ripples to look like straight lines on a scan, and for old objects to move far from where they originally came from. Some argue that there just isn't enough clear proof yet to say this was a city, and that the patterns might just be natural. So this spot is better thought of as a mystery, but a cool one at that. North of Turkey and east of the Balkans, there's a big inland sea called the Black Sea. It has a strange feature. Once you go deep enough, the water doesn't have much oxygen in it. That might sound like a small detail, but it makes a huge difference for shipwrecks. The usual creatures that chew up wood can't live down there, so ships that sink to those depths can stay in much better shape than normal. In recent years, teams using robotic submarines found dozens of wrecks on the Black Sea floor. One of the most incredible is an ancient Greek trading ship, around 2,400 years old, sitting upright about 2 kilometers down. The mast is still standing, the shape of the hull is clear, and parts of the deck layout are still visible. Before this, historians mostly had to rely on pictures, painted on pottery, and a few broken remains to figure out how these ships were built. We've also found later ships from Roman times and the Middle Ages, many of them with cargo and details still in place, coiled ropes, carved decorations, and piles of jars and containers preserved in the mud. Instead of being torn apart by waves and sea life, these ships have ended up becoming more like underwater museums. On Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, there are thousands of water-filled sinkholes and caves known as cenotes. To the ancient Maya people who lived there, these weren't just natural pools, they were seen as entrances to the underworld and places where important rituals happened. Some of them connected into long underwater cave systems. One of those systems, divers found the skeleton of a girl who lived about 13,000 years ago. Bones were discovered alongside the bones of ancient animals, some that are now extinct. Back when she died, these caves weren't underwater yet. People and animals could walk into them on dry ground. Later, rising water filled the caves and helped protect what was inside. And then much later, the Maya started using these same places for their ceremonies. Deep in the dark sections of some cenotes and caves, researchers have found pottery, incense burners, stone platforms, and human remains, and many of these seem to be offerings connected to rain and water gods.
Deep in a well in Harbin, China, a laborer found a massive skull in 1933. He hid it to keep it safe from invading forces, and it stayed hidden for 85 years. When it finally reached scientists in 2021, they realized that it wasn't a Neanderthal or a modern human. It was something else entirely. Nicknamed Dragon Man, this skull belonged to a lineage that might be our closest extinct relative, even closer than the Neanderthals. He had a massive head, square eye sockets, and huge teeth, but a brain in size similar to ours. This discovery shook the human family tree to its roots. It suggests that there were multiple groups of intelligent humans living across Asia, and we may have to rethink exactly who we are most closely related to. When a young girl named Maria stepped into a cave in Spain in 1879 and shouted, "Look, Papa, oxen!" she wasn't just seeing drawings, she was looking at the first evidence that cavemen were actually master artists. At the time, experts refused to believe the paintings of bison and horses were real. They were just too good. Critics actually accused the discoverer of hiring a modern artist to fake them. It took 20 years for the scientific community to apologize and admit that they were wrong. Altamira changed our entire perception of our ancestors. They weren't primitive brutes. They were people with an incredible eye for color, movement, and beauty. It proved that the human soul and the need for art have been within us from the very beginning. What if a single partial skeleton could tell us a foundational story about what it means to be human? That's the legacy of a small hominid nicknamed Lucy. Discovered in 1974 by Donald Johnson and Tom Gray in the Afar region of Ethiopia, Lucy is arguably the most famous hominid fossil. While only about 40% complete, her skeletal remains, particularly her pelvis, femur, and tibia, provided undeniable evidence that she walked upright habitually, even though her brain size was still relatively small, comparable to a chimpanzee's. This discovery was a game changer. For a long time, it was debated whether large brains or bipedalism came first in human evolution. Lucy provided strong evidence that walking upright was a critical early adaptation, preceding the significant increase in brain size. This fundamentally shifted our understanding of human origins, showing us that our ancestors were walking on two legs millions of years before they developed the large brains we associate with modern humans. Lucy showed us that the journey to humanity was a complex mosaic of traits evolving at different times, with bipedalism being a crucial first step that opened up new possibilities for survival and adaptation. Imagine a place so rich in the relics of our deepest past that it earned the nickname the Cradle of Mankind. Our number one spot goes to a series of monumental discoveries in one incredible location that utterly transformed our understanding of human evolution. For decades, the Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania has been an unparalleled window into early human history, primarily through the tireless work of Louis and Marie Leakey and their family. Starting in the 1930s and continuing for many years, their discoveries have provided irrefutable evidence for the African origin of humanity and the incredible antiquity of human tool making. Most crucially, the consistent finding of very primitive stone tools, known as Oldowan tools, dating back as far as 2.6 million years ago. It proved that hominins were crafting tools much earlier and for a much longer period than previously conceived. The collective discoveries of Olduvai Gorge provided concrete proof that early humans evolved in Africa, demonstrating the sequence of bipedalism, tool use, and eventually larger brains. It pushed back the timeline for human ancestry by millions of years and established Africa as the central stage for the earliest chapters of the human story. It didn't just add a piece to the puzzle, it built the entire foundation upon which our understanding of human evolution now stands. It truly changed everything that we thought we knew about where we came from. From the paint studios of 100,000 years ago to hidden DNA in our own cells, these discoveries prove that the more we dig, the more we realize how connected we are to the past. It's not just about bones and stones, it's about human spirits that drive to create, explore, and survive.
Between what's now Britain and mainland Europe, there used to be a huge stretch of dry land called Dodgerland. Today, it's under the North Sea, but back then, it was a place with rivers, wetlands, and hunting grounds, not just a muddy strip of coast. As the Ice Age ended, sea levels slowly rose and swallowed more and more of it until only the highest areas were left. One major event in that story was a massive underwater landslide off Norway that sent this huge wave crashing into the area. That wave probably wiped out some of the last low-lying parts people could actually live on. Now it's all under dozens of meters of water, and the only reason we know it was once a busy landscape is because modern fishing boats keep dragging up bits of it. They've pulled up mammoth bones, antler tools, and even human remains from the seafloor. There are also traces of what people there were actually doing with materials. So for example, they used a kind of sticky black glue made from tree bark, which they would have heated in a very specific way to get it just right. It wasn't something that just happened by accident. In the waters south of China, there are two shipwrecks sitting so deep that no human diver will ever reach them. We've only gotten a look at the ships through remotely operated submersibles. They date back to China's Ming Dynasty, about 500 years ago, and they're resting around a mile down on the ocean floor. What makes them so interesting is that they seem to show both directions of a trade route at the same time. The first ship was loaded with blue and white bowls and jars made of porcelain. They're stacked in these neat layers, and because it's so cold and dark down there, they're in surprisingly good condition. The second ship, about a dozen miles away, looks like it was on the opposite journey. It was carrying huge wooden logs, the kind of strong, dense woods that would be used for building ships or large buildings back in China. So you got one ship carrying Chinese products outward and another bringing raw materials in. Pretty interesting up close look at how their trade network operated. On the northwest coast of France, out in the Atlantic, there's a small island called Ile de Sang. Just off that island on the seafloor, divers found something that doesn't look like ordinary rock. It's a long line of big granite stones stretching about the length of a football field, and some of the blocks are standing upright. Today that whole thing is underwater, but when it was built, the sea level was much lower. Back then, this would have been on or near dry land. People had to move and arrange these heavy stones by hand, and they clearly didn't fall into place naturally. It lines up with other ancient stone sites in that part of France, where you see rows of standing stones and big stone structures on land. The exact purpose of this underwater wall isn't totally clear. It might have marked a boundary, been part of some larger structure, or had some kind of ritual meaning. What we can say is that people thousands of years ago were willing to organize big groups, move all these stones, and reshape their coastline. Over time, with rising seas and the changing shoreline, the place was just swallowed by the ocean, leaving this strange man-made line of stones resting under the waves. In Central Asia, high up in the mountains of Kyrgyzstan, there's a huge lake called Isyk-Kul. Even though it sits in this cold, snowy area, the lake actually doesn't freeze. And under it, especially near the shore, there are signs of old settlements that used to sit right on the edge. Over time, earthquakes changed the shape of the coastline. Some parts of those old towns ended up below the waterline. Divers and survey teams have found foundations of buildings and burial areas, and the artifacts they pulled from the lake seem to come from different cultures, steppe nomads, settled farmers, and stuff that would have probably come from traders passing through with goods. And that's because Isyk-Kul sat along routes that connected China, the Middle East, and Europe. So it makes sense that towns here were busy stopping points. On the southeast coast of India, there's a town called the Mahabalipuram, known for its ancient stone temples right by the sea. There have always been stories that there were more grand temples along that shoreline, but that most of them were swallowed by the ocean over time. For a long while, that sounded more like legend than proven history. But in 2004, a massive earthquake in the Indian Ocean set off a tsunami. Just before the waves hit the coast, the water briefly rushed away from the beach, exposing parts of the seafloor that nobody normally sees, and people reported seeing lines of stone and what looked like carved shapes out where the water usually is. After the disaster, once it was possible to go back safely, teams went out to look more closely. Under a few meters of water not far from shore, they found walls, carved blocks, and statues that matched the style of the surviving temple on land. Some stones clearly belonged to pillars or decorated parts of old buildings. The picture that's formed is that Mahabalipuram used to have a larger complex of temples and buildings along a coastline that's changed a lot over hundreds and hundreds of years.
What if a city mentioned by the famous historian Herodotus simply vanished? For centuries, scholars thought Tanis Heraklion was just a legend, a mythical port city lost to time. That was until a team of underwater archaeologists found it resting at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. Located near the mouth of the Nile, this city was Egypt's main port for centuries before Alexandria was even a thought. In 2000, researchers found colossal statues, 700 anchors, and over 60 shipwrecks perfectly preserved. It didn't just sink, sank, it was swallowed by the sea. This discovery changed everything we knew about the trade relationship between ancient Egypt and Greece. It proved that the mythical city was actually a massive, bustling economic hub. It also showed us just how fragile even the mightiest civilizations are when faced with the power of nature. Imagine a cave so narrow that only the world's thinnest archaeologists could squeeze through the cracks. Inside, they found something that broke the rules of evolution, a brand new species of human ancestors that shouldn't have existed. Deep in the Rising Star cave system in South Africa, scientists discovered Homo naledi. This creature had a brain the size of an orange, but its hands and feet look remarkably like ours. The most shocking part? There's evidence that they may have intentionally buried their dead in the dark recesses of the cave, a behavior we thought was reserved only for modern humans with much larger brains. Homo naledi forced us to admit that the path to being human wasn't a straight line. We weren't the only ones with complex rituals, and small brain doesn't necessarily mean primitive. We've all heard that Columbus discovered America in 1492, but what if I told you that a group of Norse sailors beat him to it by nearly 500 years? For a long time, the Vinland sagas were treated like tall tales, until a tiny bronze pin was found in Newfoundland, Canada. In 1960, archaeologists discovered the remains of an 11th century Viking settlement. They found sod houses exactly like those in Greenland and Iceland, along with evidence of ironworking, the first of its kind in North America. This discovery completely rewrote the history of global exploration. It proved that the Atlantic was crossed way earlier than we thought, and that the Vikings weren't just raiders, they were sophisticated transoceanic explorers who managed to build a home in the New World half a millennium before the Age of Discovery. When did humans first start thinking abstractly? For a long time, we thought it happened in Europe about 40,000 years ago, but a cave in South Africa proved that humans were artists and scientists way before that, by about 60,000 years. At Blombos Cave, archaeologists found a 100,000-year-old paint factory. They found shells used as mixing bowls, bone spatulas, and pieces of ochre engraved with geometric patterns. These people weren't just surviving, they were making pigments for body paint or decoration. This shifted the creative explosion of humanity back by tens of thousands of years. It showed us that the capacity for symbolic thought and complex chemistry was already hardwired into our ancestors long before they ever left Africa. You might think a bow and arrow is a recent invention in the grand scheme of things, but discoveries in a South African rock shelter showed that our ancestors were master engineers 70,000 years ago. Researchers at Sibutu Cave found tiny stone points with traces of blood and bone glue. They even found the earliest known bone needle and evidence of bedding made from medicinal plants to keep insects away. The glue was a complex mixture of plant gum and red ochre that required precise heating to work. This discovery proved that Middle Stone Age humans had a high-tech toolkit. They understood chemical properties and ballistics far earlier than anyone had imagined. It shows that the modern mind was already at work solving problems with advanced technology long before the first civilizations rose. For a long time, we thought we knew exactly where the root of the human family tree was, but a brand new discovery from Morocco, dated with incredible accuracy, has pushed that story back even further. In early 2026, scientists announced that fossils found in Thomas Quarry are roughly 773,000 years old. These hominins show a mix of ancient and modern features, placing them right at the branching point between us and our Eurasian cousins. This discovery is a massive deal because it uses Earth's magnetic field, which flipped nearly 800,000 years ago, as a natural timestamp. It proves that the evolution of the genus Homo was happening across the entire African continent, not just in one small corner, and much earlier than we had ever thought possible.
In Denisova Cave, southern Siberia, researchers have been piecing together evidence of a species of human nobody knew existed until 2010, the Denisovans, from 40,000 years ago. We have almost nothing physical, a few teeth, finger bone, a jaw fragment. What we do have, though, is a bracelet. Green chlorite stone polished to a near mirror finish. And inside the central hole, which is perfectly round, there's evidence of high-speed rotary drilling, a technique that wasn't supposed to exist for another 30,000 years. The team that first published on it noted the workmanship was, and I'm quoting here, consistent with 21st century technology. Now, that's not an explanation. That's just a very careful scientific way of saying they don't have an explanation. More than 130 of these have been found across Europe. Small, hollow bronze objects, 12-sided with circular holes of varying sizes in each face and a tiny sphere at each corner. They date to roughly the 1st through 5th centuries AD, found at Roman-era sites across France, Germany, Switzerland, Hungary, and Britain. Here's what's actually unsettling about them. Not a single Roman text mentions them. Nothing. In all of classical Roman literature, engineering manuals, census records, military dispatches, private letters, there is not one reference to what these things were. They've never been found in Rome itself, only in the provincial north. Over 50 competing theories have been proposed, but none have achieved consensus. The silence in the historical record isn't a gap. It looks more like a choice. Whether you believe it or not, that's pretty bizarre. In 1986, construction workers in Sichuan province, China, accidentally broke through the ground into 2 massive ritual pits nobody knew existed. Inside were bronze masks, gold objects, and ivory belonging to a Bronze Age civilization not recorded anywhere in Chinese history. The Sangshidu culture, around 3,000 to 4,000 years old. The faces on the masks don't look like anything in known Chinese archaeology. Huge eyes with pupils extended on bronze stalks, some projecting nearly 16 centimeters out of the face. Enormous wing-like ears. No connection to the mythology of any neighboring civilization. In 2021, 4 more pits were discovered and formally rewrote China's Bronze Age history. The Chinese government has tightly restricted independent research at the site from the beginning. What the masks represent, what ritual they were a part of, and what happened to this civilization is officially undetermined. Around 7,000 years ago, a civilization we call the Ubaid culture existed in what is now southern Iraq. They built the first temples in Mesopotamia. They laid the foundations for what eventually became Sumer and Babylon. Across multiple excavation sites from this period, archaeologists have found figurines, humanoid, but with features that don't look human. Elongated heads, almond-shaped eyes, long, narrow snouts, some with tails, some appearing to nurse infants. The design is consistent across separate sites, which rules out one artist's style or regional tradition. Mainstream archaeology's explanation is that these represent a deity. No tablet has been found to confirm that, no ritual context, no inscription describing what they are. We just know that the people who built the first cities in human history made these figures consistently, and nobody has ever fully explained why. I mean, I don't know, that's just kind of nuts. The Corlech head, a 3-faced carved stone idol found near Corlech Hill in County Cavan, Ireland, dating to around the 1st or 2nd century AD. 3 faces, each staring in a different direction, found in a region with centuries of dark folklore attached to it. To the ancient Celts, the head was the seat of the soul. Carved heads like this weren't decorative, they were considered inhabited. But here's the thing. Somewhere between the 10th and 13th centuries, the communities living near this specific object buried it deliberately. Scholars believe they buried it because they believed it was cursed and needed to be put into the ground. It's now at the National Museum of Ireland. The modern legend surrounding it is unverifiable, but the burying? Well, I mean, that's documented. The people who lived alongside this thing for centuries made a decision. What they knew that we don't, well, that's the part that gets pretty unsettling. Deep in a network of tunnels beneath the desert at Saqqara, Egypt, there are 24 massive granite boxes. Each one weighs between 70 and 100 tons, each carved from a single block of Aswan granite. The lids alone weigh up to 27 tons, and they were found, all of them, completely empty. No mummies, no remains, no residue, most without a single inscription. The debate around them is actually where it gets interesting. Engineers who've measured the interior surfaces claim the flatness is beyond what hand tools should be able to produce. Egyptologists say the precision claims are overstated. Both groups have been making the same argument for 30 years and neither has fully settled it. Now, those tunnels are so narrow that getting the boxes in in would have required engineering that nobody has replicated. The official position is that there's nothing left to find. That might be right, or it might just be the most convenient possible position to take. In 1887, a farmer in West Dunbartonshire, Scotland, uncovered a massive flat rock embedded in the earth. Roughly 13 meters by 8 meters, about the size of 3 tennis courts, covered in 90 carved symbols, cup and ring marks, spirals, geometric patterns, dating to around 3000 BC. Older than Stonehenge, the largest Bronze Age carved rock in Scotland. In spring 1965, a team of professional archaeologists came to the site, made detailed records, and then buried it, deliberately, under a meter of soil. No public consultation, no warning to the local community. The official reason given was protection from vandalism. It stayed buried for 51 years until 2016, when researchers from the University of Glasgow briefly uncovered it to do a digital scan. Then they also reburied it. It is still down there now. Nobody has said when or whether it will be fully excavated. Protection from vandalism. That's what's on record. Well, I would love to believe that's the whole story, but I don't.
In 1954, workers clearing sand near the base of the Great Pyramid hit a big sealed pit made of limestone blocks, and when archaeologists opened it, they found a massive wooden ship inside, but it had been taken completely apart. The whole vessel was broken down into 1,224 separate pieces and stacked neatly inside the pit. The wood had been sitting down there for around 4,500 years, going back to the time of Pharaoh Khufu. An Egyptian conservator named Ahmed Yosef spent years carefully putting it back together piece by piece. When it was done, the ship measured around 43 meters long, just over 140 feet. It's now known as the Khufu Solar Boat, but there's still debate as to what it was actually for. One idea is that it was used in Khufu's funeral, sailed along the Nile as part of the ceremony. In ancient Egyptian belief, the sun god Ra traveled across the sky each day in a solar barge. Some researchers think Khufu was buried with a boat so he could join that journey after death. But they're not actually sure if the boat was ever actually put in water or if it was built mainly as a symbolic object. Tutankhamun became pharaoh when he was around 9 years old, and he died when he was about 19. Ever since his tomb was found in 1922, people have been trying to figure out what happened to him. For a long time, the leading theory was that someone took his life. Some historians thought he might have been killed during a power struggle. His father's reign had been pretty controversial, and things were pretty unstable. X-rays taken in 1968 seemed to show a bone fragment inside his skull. Maybe he died from a blow to the head. But later scans changed the picture a bit. In 2005, CT scans showed that Tut had a bad fracture in his left leg, and it may have happened not long before he died. That kind of injury could easily get infected back then. Then in 2010, DNA tests on the mummy found he had malaria. The testing also showed his parents were likely closely related, probably a brother and sister, and yeah, that kind of thing tends to cause some health problems. And the scans show he probably had a club foot and other issues with his bones, so not the healthiest guy from the start. But nothing's been proven for certain. Officially, the cause of his death is still unresolved. There might have been an enormous structure in ancient Egypt that was so big it made the pyramids look small. The Greek historian Herodotus visited Egypt around 450 BCE and described this massive building near the pyramid of Amenemhat III. He called it a labyrinth. According to him, it had 3,000 rooms, half of them underground. He said the place was huge and almost impossible to navigate. Other ancient writers described it too. The Greek geographer Strabo mentioned it and said it was full of courtyards and halls, all connected by passageways. But where is it? A lot of archaeologists think it was probably part of a large mortuary complex, that over thousands of years, people came and took the stone blocks to use them in other buildings. That happened a lot in ancient Egypt. Excavations in the 1800s found some foundations and fragments in the area that might have been part of it, but nothing that comes close to what the ancient writers described. Some researchers think a large portion of it could still be buried somewhere out there though, but until more of the site gets dug up, the real size and layout of the place will remain a mystery. The pyramids at Giza aren't just big, they're also lined up with almost perfect accuracy. The Great Pyramid is aligned with the 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, with an error of less than a fraction of a degree. That's remarkably precise for something built 4,500 years ago. So, how'd they pull it off? There are some theories. One is that they used stars, specifically ones that circle the North Pole, to find true north by watching how they moved through the night sky. In 2000, a British Egyptologist named Kate Spence came up with a more specific theory. She thought the builders used 2 particular stars that lined up vertically in the sky around 2500 BCE, Kochab and Mizar. The line between them basically pointed straight north. The builders could just line up a sighting stick or tool along that line to mark the direction on the ground. You might be wondering why we can't do that today. Well, the stars move slowly over time. The alignment of Kochab and Mizar doesn't point true north anymore. So this seems like a pretty plausible theory, but I still can't say for sure. The Great Pyramid of Giza was finished around 2560 BCE, built during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu. It was the tallest thing humans had ever built at that point, and it held the title for close to 4,000 years. It's made from roughly 2.3 million stone blocks. A lot of those blocks weigh between 2 and 15 tons each, and we still don't fully know how they did this. The main puzzle is how those stones got lifted into place. A few different theories have been thrown around. Some researchers think workers used long, straight ramps built out of mud, brick, and rubble. There's also evidence that workers brought stones by boat along the Nile and through a canal system that would have run close to Giza. One really useful piece of evidence showed up in 2013 near the Red Sea. A set of ancient papyrus documents, now called the Diary of Merer. They describe a worker named Merer who helped move limestone blocks for Khufu's pyramid by boat. The diary only covers getting the stones to Giza. It doesn't touch, the hardest part, how millions of heavy blocks were lifted and stacked to create one of, if not the most iconic landmarks in the entire world.
In 2011, the Supreme Court of India ordered the inventory of all vaults beneath the Sri Padmanabhaswamy temple. 5 vaults were opened, gold statues, gem-encrusted crowns, thousands of gold coins. The total estimated value has been placed between 22 billion and 1 trillion US dollars, making it the richest known religious institution on Earth. Vault B was not opened. The royal family obtained a Supreme Court injunction specifically to prevent it. The vault door is carved with 2 massive cobras. No handles, no hinges, no visible locking mechanism. Local tradition holds it was sealed using a sound-based ritual whose reversal, if it ever existed, is no longer known. The committee appointed by the Supreme Court, using, and I'm quoting, all possible technological resources, could not open it. The BBC reported in 2011 that the court ruled it should simply just remain shut. A modern court, with full legal authority, decided an ancient sealed room should stay that way. The official reason is religious significance, but here's the thing. They had every legal right to open it and walked away. It could be a total respect for tradition, but that's definitely an unusual thing for a court to decide. When Howard Carter opened King Tut's tomb in 1922, among the gold and the furniture were 2 trumpets, 1 bronze, 1 silver, the oldest playable instruments ever found, silent for over 3,000 years. In April 1939, a BBC researcher named James Tappern played one of them live on radio, heard by an estimated 150 million people. The first time those notes had been heard since ancient Egypt. Within weeks, a fire broke out at the Cairo Museum. Shortly after, Britain declared war on Germany. Egyptian scholars explicitly warned the trumpets should never be played again. They are now kept under strict handling protocols. In 2011, during Egypt's political revolution, reports surfaced that a visiting official played them at the museum. Power cuts inside the building followed, chaos outside. Egyptologists declined to comment on any connection, but I'd say it's pretty unsettling to say the least. Timur the Great, one of the most feared conquerors in history. His campaigns were responsible for an estimated 17 million deaths, roughly 5% of the world population at the time. Buried in the Gur-i Amir mausoleum in Samarkand in 1405, and inside the tomb, an inscription: "Whomever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Soviet archaeologists opened it on June 19th and 20th, 1941. 3 days later, June 22nd, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa. 3 million troops, the largest military land invasion in human history. The invasion had been in planning for months. Coincidence is the obvious answer, but here's the thing. Stalin himself apparently didn't find it quite so straightforward. He ordered Timur's remains returned in November 1942 with full Islamic burial rites, the month after the Battle of Stalingrad, generally considered the turning point of the war. Could be coincidence, could be that Stalin was being politically careful with Soviet Muslim populations. Both are reasonable, but a man who publicly dismantled the church, who didn't believe in curses, quietly putting him back in the ground, and nobody officially connects those two things. I don't know. Are they meddling with things bigger than they're letting on? Well, I guess in this case, they already had.
In 2017, scientists discovered something huge hidden inside the Great Pyramid of Giza. They found it without breaking through a single wall. A team called the Scan Pyramids Project used something called muon scanning. Muons are tiny particles that get created when cosmic rays hit our atmosphere. They fly through pretty much everything, including solid rock. So the researchers placed detectors inside the pyramid and tracked how many of these particles were passing through different spots. Basically, it works like an X-ray of the inside of the pyramid. When they looked at the results, something showed up that nobody was expecting. There's a massive empty space sitting above the Grand Gallery. That's the tall hallway that leads up to the King's Chamber. The void is at least 30 meters long, about 100 feet, and it looks like it's a similar shape and size to the Grand Gallery itself. Nobody knew this space existed at all. It's the first major hidden structure found inside the Great Pyramid since the 1800s. Here's the thing though, nobody's actually gone inside it. Researchers don't know if it's a chamber, a passageway, could also just be a gap. It doesn't connect to any hallway or passage that we know of. And drilling into the pyramid just to peek inside isn't something anyone wants to do without a very good reason. So scientists can see the shape of this void using particle data, but what's actually in there, nobody knows. For a long time, people assumed we already knew what was inside the Great Pyramid. Then 2023 came along and proved that wrong. The Scan Pyramids team found a hidden corridor tucked right behind the outer stones near the pyramid's main entrance. Same kind of approach as before, muon detection and tiny cameras pushed through small gaps in the stone. When they finally got a look inside, they found a narrow passage about 9 meters long, around 30 feet. It's sitting behind a set of large triangular limestone blocks that sit just above the entrance. Those triangular blocks have been noticed before. Everyone assumed they were just there to take weight off the entrance passage below, basically structural support. But finding a corridor behind them changes things a bit. Nobody's sure why it was built. One idea is that it's a part of the pressure relief design, just engineering, but another idea, a much more tantalizing one, is that it might lead deeper into the pyramid, somewhere nobody's ever been. Back in the early 90s, engineers sent a small robot into some of the narrow shafts that run through the Great Pyramid. These shafts are only about 8 inches wide, way too small for a person. For years, archaeologists figured they were just ventilation shafts. Then in 1993, a German robot was sent to crawl up one of those shafts coming out of the Queen's Chamber. Near the end of the shaft, it found this small limestone slab blocking the way. It was shaped almost like a tiny door, and had 2 little copper handles attached to the front. That raised an obvious question. If these were just air vents, why would someone go to the trouble of putting a sealed stone door at the end of one? Later, another robot drilled a small hole through the slab and pushed a camera through to see what was on the other side. Instead of a room or open space, the camera found another sealed stone block just a short distance beyond the first one. So there are at least 2 separate barriers sitting in that shaft, and whatever's behind them has never been explored. Nefertiti is one of the most well-known figures from ancient Egypt. Her bust, the sculpture of her face, was discovered in 1912 and is one of the most famous ancient objects in the world. But the same can't be said for her tomb. That's never been found. She lived in the 14th century BCE, was the wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten. She was a major player during a pretty unusual period in Egyptian history, when the royal family tried to scrap the traditional Egyptian gods and replace them with worship of a single sun deity. After Akhenaten died, things get fuzzy. Some historians think Nefertiti may have actually ruled Egypt herself for a short time under a different name. Others think she died before that could happen, but the bigger question is where she's buried. And it's strange, because most pharaohs and queens from that era have been found. One theory is that her tomb is somewhere in the Valley of the Kings. Some researchers have even said it could be hidden behind the walls of Tutankhamun's tomb. In 2015, radar scans of Tut's burial chamber picked up what seemed like hidden spaces behind the walls. Curious, but later scans gave mixed results, so there's still some controversy about that theory. Unfortunately, this one is still a mystery. In 1907, archaeologists opened a tomb in the Valley of the Kings called KV55. It was a strange scene from the start. The tomb had been messed with in ancient times. The coffin was smashed up, the gold face mask was torn off, and all the inscriptions identifying the person had been scratched out. Someone had put real effort into making sure nobody would know who this person was. Inside the wrecked coffin was a badly deteriorated mummy. At first, researchers couldn't even tell if it was male or female. Eventually, most concluded it was a male royal from the late 18th dynasty, but pinning down exactly who it was set off a debate that's been going on ever since. Some thought it was Akhenaten, the pharaoh I mentioned earlier, who tried to replace Egypt's traditional religion with worship of a single god called Aten. In 2010, DNA testing suggested the mummy was the father of Tut and the son of Pharaoh Amenhotep III. That points pretty strongly toward Akhenaten, but some researchers have issues with how old the body appears to be, whether the physical evidence really matches up with what we know about Akhenaten. So, more than 100 years after the tomb was first opened, we still don't know who exactly the mummy is, or was.
In 1945, a collection of ancient writings was discovered buried in Egypt. Known as the Nag Hammadi texts, these documents contain Gnostic teachings that directly contradict traditional Christian beliefs. Some texts suggest that the material world is an illusion, while others claim that secret knowledge, not faith, is the key to salvation. Early religious authorities labeled these writings as dangerous because they threatened the structure of organized religion. As a result, many of these texts were suppressed, hidden, or destroyed for centuries. The Popol Vuh is a sacred text of the Maya civilization, describing the creation of the world, the origins of humanity, and interactions between humans and powerful deities. It tells stories of failed human creations, powerful gods, and trials that shaped existence itself. Early Spanish colonizers considered it dangerous and attempted to destroy it, fearing it preserved beliefs that conflicted with Christianity and could influence indigenous populations. What survived was only because it had been secretly rewritten and hidden by those determined to preserve it. The text offers a perspective on reality that is completely different from Western traditions, one where humans are not the first attempt at creation, and where the gods are far more complex and unpredictable, and that alone made it something authorities wanted erased. The Emerald Tablet is a short but incredibly influential text attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, a figure linked to ancient wisdom and esoteric knowledge. Despite being only a few lines long, it contains cryptic statements about the nature of reality, transformation, and what later became known as alchemy. The phrase, "as above, so below," originates from this text, suggesting a deep connection between the universe and human existence. Also a really creepy movie. If you haven't seen that movie, you should really watch it. It's so scary. What made it so controversial is how much meaning scholars believed was hidden within such a small passage. For centuries, alchemists and philosophers tried to decode it, believing it contained secrets about matter, consciousness, and even immortality. Some believed it held the key to understanding the structure of the universe itself, while others warned that misinterpreting it could lead people down dangerous paths of thought or obsession. This ancient Buddhist text, also known as the Bardo Todol, describes what happens between death and rebirth. It provides detailed instructions for navigating the afterlife, including how to recognize illusions, avoid fear-based traps, and ultimately escape the cycle of reincarnation. What makes it especially unusual is that it is traditionally read aloud to the dying or recently deceased, as if guiding them through the process in real time. What made it unsettling to outsiders was how precise and experiential it seemed. Rather than vague spiritual ideas, it reads like a step-by-step guide, describing visions, entities, and stages of consciousness with striking clarity. To some, it felt like philosophy, and more like a direct account of something that had already been experienced.
For hundreds of years, nobody even knew these passages existed. The Great Pyramid has a room called the Queen's Chamber. Back in 1872, a British engineer named Wayman Dixon found two narrow shafts hidden behind the walls. They're only about 8 inches wide, way too small for a person to fit through, and for over a century, nobody had any idea where they went. Then in 1993, a German engineer named Rudolf Gattenbrink sent a small robot into one of them. It went for more than 200 feet before it hit a tiny limestone door. The stone slab had 2 copper fittings on it, almost like handles. Nobody expected to find something like that down there. In 2002, another robot drilled through it. On the other side was a small open space, and then another door further in. A follow-up mission in 2011 got clearer pictures past the first door and spotted red markings on some of the stones, but the passage just ended at another wall. Over 4,500 years later, nobody agrees on what these shafts were actually for. Some think they were symbolic, tied to the pharaoh's journey after death, but the thing nobody can explain is why they were sealed off in the first place. The bent pyramid is really strange. It's kind of like a proto-Egyptian pyramid. It was built for Pharaoh Snefru around 2600 BCE, and it gets its name from how it looks. The sides of it go up at an angle, and then they suddenly shift partway up. One entrance is on the north side, another one is higher up on the west side, and each leads into its own set of corridors and rooms. Inside, the passageways are steep, and some of the rooms are close to 50 feet tall, built by stacking layers of stone that gradually lean inward until they almost meet at the top. The whole layout is more complicated than other pyramids from the same period. Most researchers think the design changed during construction. The pyramid may have started developing problems, so the builders adjusted the angle on the outside and reworked parts of the inside as well. But why it ended up with 2 separate chamber systems, nobody's really nailed down. The whole thing feels almost like an experiment. Egyptian builders still figuring out how to do this at that point. And the inside of this pyramid makes that pretty obvious. It's not a polished, finished product. The smallest of the 3 Giza pyramids doesn't get a lot of attention. People have generally assumed for a long time that there wasn't much left to find inside it, but recently, teams scanning it picked up signs of possible empty spaces behind some of the granite blocks. Researchers are being careful not to overstate things. An odd reading on a scan, it doesn't automatically mean that there's a secret room, but it could be just a gap left during construction. Nothing's been confirmed. Still, it's a pretty big deal. People have assumed for generations that the pyramids had already given up everything interesting, but that keeps turning out not to be true. Whether these spaces end up being something major or just how the pyramid was built, it is a reminder that even the most famous monuments in the world, they haven't been fully explored yet. The Step Pyramid in Saqqara is often described as Egypt's first pyramid, built around 2650 BCE. On the surface, it just looks like big stone steps stacked on top of each other, but go underground and it's a completely different situation. Below the pyramid, there's a massive network of tunnels, shafts, and chambers cut straight into the rock. It spreads out in multiple directions, and some put the total length of tunnels at several kilometers. Not all of it is safe to walk through today. The main burial shaft goes deep down to a chamber that was built for Pharaoh Djoser. Around it are dozens of smaller rooms, some packed with goods meant for the afterlife. The thing that makes it unusual is how early it was. Builders were still learning how to work at this scale, and you can see that in the layout. Some corridors are planned out cleanly, others look like they were added later. or just changed along the way. Parts of it are still blocked off today because it's just not stable enough to walk through safely. After everything that's been studied down there, people are still working out exactly what the full layout looks like though. Directly under the Great Pyramid, there's a room that looks completely out of place compared to everything above it. The chambers higher up have smooth walls, clean lines, at least perfectly placed blocks. This one has none of that. The walls are rough, the floor is never leveled, there's no decoration, there's no finishing work, it's just like bedrock with a room carved into it. It's usually called the subterranean chamber. You get there through a passage that descends from the pyramid's entrance. The chamber sits at the bottom, and past it are some smaller tunnels that are even harder to get into. Nobody agrees on why it exists. One theory is that it was supposed to be the burial chamber originally, and then at some point the plans changed and everything moved up into the pyramid itself. Another idea is that it was used during construction as some kind of anchor point for getting the measurements right above ground. Neither one is solid evidence behind it though. It just doesn't fit with the rest of the pyramid. The room looks unfinished. Thousands of years later, researchers still don't know exactly why.
The Book of Enoch is an ancient Hebrew text that was excluded from most versions of the Bible, despite being referenced in some early religious traditions. It describes angels known as the Watchers, descending to earth, sharing forbidden knowledge with humans, and creating a race of giants known as the Nephilim. It goes further, detailing how this knowledge corrupted humanity and led to chaos on earth. What made this text especially controversial wasn't just its content, but how detailed and structured it was. It presents a completely different version of early human history, one where divine beings directly interfered with human development. Many believed it challenged established religious authority and raised questions that institutions didn't want answered. For centuries, it was considered too dangerous and too heretical to include in official doctrine, and many copies were lost, destroyed, or deliberately hidden. Although widely known today as a fictional creation, the idea of the Necronomicon is believed to have roots in much older mythological and esoteric traditions. Across different cultures, there are repeated stories of forbidden books containing knowledge about ancient entities, hidden dimensions, and forces beyond human understanding. These texts were often described as dangerous not because they were fictional, but because people believed they contained knowledge that could fundamentally alter a person's perception of reality. Some accounts even warned that simply reading certain passages could lead to psychological breakdown or obsession. Whether any single version truly existed or not, the concept reflects a long-standing human fear that some knowledge isn't just hidden, it's hidden for a reason. Despite its name, the Egyptian Book of the Dead isn't a single book, but a collection of funerary texts designed to guide souls through the afterlife. These texts were often buried with the dead, personalized for the individual, and filled with spells, passwords, and instructions meant to help them survive what came next. It includes detailed descriptions of trials in the afterlife, including the famous weighing of the heart against a feather to determine one's fate. What made it unsettling to later scholars wasn't just its focus on death, but how systemic and precise it was. It didn't read like symbolic mythology. It read like a structured process, almost like a manual. That level of detail made some question whether it was purely belief or based on something people thought they truly understood. Discovered between 1947 and 1956 in caves near the Dead Sea, these scrolls are some of the oldest known biblical texts ever found. But what made them controversial were the differences they revealed compared to later accepted scripture. Some scrolls contained alternate versions of familiar texts, while others introduced entirely new writings that suggested different beliefs, rules, and interpretations of faith. They also hinted at sects with very different views on morality, prophecy, and the end of the world. For years, access to these documents was tightly controlled, and only a small group of scholars were allowed to study them. This secrecy led to speculation that certain fragments may have been withheld or delayed due to their potentially disruptive implications. Even today, debate continues about what they reveal and whether everything has truly been made public. The Codex Gigas is one of the largest medieval manuscripts ever created, weighing over 160 pounds and requiring multiple people to move it, but it's not just its size that made people fear it. The book contains a massive, full-page illustration of what appears to be the devil, unlike anything seen in other manuscripts of its time. Alongside this image are religious texts, medical knowledge, historical records, and even exorcism rituals, all compiled into a single volume. According to legend, it was written in a single night by a monk who made a deal with a dark entity to avoid punishment. While historians dismiss that as myth, the sheer scale of the work and the strange mix of content made it feel unnatural to many who studied it. Its ominous imagery and mysterious origins led some to believe it carried something more than just knowledge, but something intentionally unsettling. It's haunted. That's what I'm trying to say, is that it's haunted. Clearly. Discovered in 1912, the Voynich manuscript is one of the most mysterious books ever found. Written in an unknown language that no one has been able to decode, it contains strange illustrations of unidentifiable plants, bizarre astronomical diagrams, and human figures interacting with unknown systems. Experts have spent decades trying to understand it, but every attempt has failed. What makes it unsettling isn't just that it's unreadable, but that it appears highly structured, as if it was meant to be understood by someone. Some researchers have even suggested that if it were fully decoded, it would reveal knowledge that was intentionally hidden.
Out in the desert near Saqqara, cut deep into the bedrock, there's an underground site that doesn't get nearly enough attention. The Serapeum is a long set of tunnels, and inside them are some of the largest stone containers ever found in Egypt. Solid granite sarcophagi, heavy as hell. Each one weighs up to 70 tons. Just moving something that heavy into an underground tunnel would be an enormous task today, let alone thousands of years ago. They were used to bury Apis bulls, animals that were considered living representations of the god Ptah, treated almost like royalty. When one died, it got a formal burial inside one of these giant boxes. The tunnels are narrow and low in places, which makes it even harder to picture how these sarcophagi got in there. Some sections were clearly cut specifically to move the boxes through, but the exact method they would have used is still something researchers argue about. With the tools they had at the time, it would have been a massive undertaking. Parts of the site are open to visit, definitely a site that I would be adding to my list if I'm ever lucky enough to go to Egypt. Underneath the Giza Plateau, way below the pyramids, there's this underground structure called the Osiris Shaft. It's not just one chamber, it's more like a vertical stack of levels carved straight down into the rock, rooms sitting at different depths as you go lower. The name comes from Osiris, the Egyptian god tied to death, the afterlife. Inside you got this mix of spaces. Some were carved cleanly into the rock. Others are partially flooded because groundwater keeps seeping in at the lower levels. Researchers have also found stone sarcophagi and carved niches inside some of the rooms. The problem is access. People have known about it and studied parts of it over the years, but getting all the way down is not easy. Like I said, there's water filling sections of it, and some areas just are not stable enough to really explore safely. But most archaeologists think that this didn't start as one finished design. It probably began as something smaller, maybe a tomb, and then got expanded and modified over time as different layers were added. Even now, though, there are parts of it that haven't been fully explored. Tutankhamun's tomb is one of the most famous archaeological finds in history. But even with all the attention, there is still some mystery. In 2015, researchers used ground-penetrating radar to scan the walls inside the burial chamber. The scan suggested there might be empty space behind two of those walls. That got people talking pretty quickly, because one of the ideas that came up was that there could be another chamber back there, possibly even connected to Queen Nefertiti. Unfortunately, that part has never been proven. More scans were done in 2016 and again in 2018, and instead of clearing things up, there were just more questions. Some teams said they still saw signs of possible voids. Others said they didn't really see anything convincing at all. A lot of it comes down to how radar readings behave when they pass through thick stone, and how different researchers interpret the same results in different ways. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities said there wasn't solid evidence for hidden chambers. Other researchers were still convinced that it couldn't be ruled out entirely, though. In 2023, researchers announced they'd found a corridor inside the Great Pyramid that had been sealed off and completely unknown for more than 4,500 years. It was found using scanning technology. The corridor is above the pyramid's main entrance, about 9 meters long, with a triangular ceiling, a design that helps spread the weight of everything pressing down from above. That same approach was used in other parts of the pyramid, but this particular passage, they'd never found it before. The main theory is that it was just an empty space designed to take pressure off that section, but there's also the possibility that it connects to something else further in that hasn't been found yet. Nobody's physically gone in, there's no hidden room or artifacts. All they know for sure is there is a passage, one that's been sitting there completely unknown for thousands of years. Similarly, in 2017, scientists confirmed there was a massive hidden space inside the Great Pyramid that nobody had known about. The technique they used is called muon scanning. Muons are tiny particles that constantly fall from space, and they pass through solid rock, but they don't behave the same way through everything. Dense stone slows them down differently than open air does, so by tracking how they move through the pyramid, researchers could get a picture of what was inside without cutting into anything. And what they found was a large empty space above the Grand Gallery, one of the main interior corridors. At least 30 meters long, one of the biggest unknown spaces ever detected inside the pyramid. Multiple researchers from Japan and France working on something called the Scanned Pyramids Project all came to the same conclusion. The space is definitely there. What nobody knows is what it was built for or whether it connects to anything else. Nobody's gone in. Problem is, it's sealed inside solid stone, so actually opening it up, that would risk damaging the pyramid, and they don't want to do that, obviously. So, everything researchers know about it comes from scan data. It's an enormous slab of granite standing in Blekinge, Sweden. It's 13 feet tall, and it's been sitting in the same spot for over 1,300 years. So, what is it? A gravestone? A war memorial? No and no. It was built for one specific reason, to carry a curse. The runes carved into it aren't regular Viking writing either. They're from an older, more ritualistic alphabet people at the time considered far more powerful. It says the person who carved it hid runes of power inside the stone, and if you mess with it, you're gonna die, and not quickly. You're looking at a slow, treacherous, drawn-out death. There's a story from the 1400s. A farmer wanted the land cleared and decided the stone needed to come down. His plan was to pile wood around the base, heat the granite until it's hot enough, then throw cold water on it so it would crack apart. Well, on the day he tried it, with zero wind in the air, apparently, a sudden gust came out of nowhere, reversed the flames, and burned him alive. The stone didn't have a scratch on it. Well, from that point on, nobody touched the thing. The Glavendrup stone holds the record for the longest runic inscription ever found in Denmark. A woman named Ragnhild had it carved to honor her husband Alle, who was a high-ranking priest or chieftain. The beginning of it is a tribute to him, a proper memorial, but the end of it is something else entirely. It says that anyone who damages the stone or moves it to honor somebody else will become Arger. What does that word mean? Well, to say that Arger is an insult would be a gross understatement. Calling someone Arger in Viking society could be a death sentence, either for the person being called it or the accuser. It basically meant coward. So if you were called this, especially as a man, you had legal grounds to defend your honor to the death. And if you didn't do anything about it, you could basically be demoted to a second-class citizen. Anyone could rob you, attack you, or unalive you, and no one was going to do a thing about it. By carving that word into the stone, Ragnhild was giving the entire community permission to destroy the life of anyone who disrespected this site. And it worked. The stone is still perfectly intact after all this time. The Egja stone is one of the stranger finds in Norway. When archaeologists dug it up, it was face down over a grave. The runes were on the underside, pressed against the dirt, pointing down, of course, at the body beneath it. The text describes a BLOOD sacrifice. It says the stone was never exposed to sunlight and wasn't carved with a regular blade. It was carved with a ritual tool used specifically for magic. And then it tells the dead person to stay where they are, warns the living not to open the grave. Vikings had a real serious fear of Draugr, and these were basically said to be zombies that kept the full intelligence of the person they used to be, and not the slow, mindless zombies that we often think of today. A Draugr was smart, and more importantly, physically powerful. The belief was that if you didn't seal a grave with the right ritual, the person inside could get back out. The Egja stone may have been that seal. Placing it face down over the body was like locking a vault from the outside, a vault specifically designed to stay locked forever. The Stentoften runestone is similar to the Bjorktorp we talked about at the top. It was found in a field in Sweden and uses almost identical language: perpetual death and insidious harm to anyone who disturbs the monument. But there's an extra layer to this one. It mentions prophecy and power in a way that strongly suggests the land around it was used for cedar. Cedar was a form of Viking sorcery that most people were genuinely afraid of, not skeptical about, actually frightened by. Involved communicating with spirits, and it was considered so dangerous and strange that even hardened warriors wanted nothing to do with it. It was basically dark witchcraft. When the runestone was found in the 1800s, it was going to be moved to a church for safekeeping. A lot of people just refused to help though, not wanting whatever negative energy that was attached to it to be transferred to them. On the Danish island of Bornholm, archaeologists dug up a burial that had nothing to do with honoring the dead. The body had been brutalized after the person was already gone. Giant boulders stacked on the chest and legs, a heavy wooden stake driven straight through the torso into the ground below. Obviously, they wanted to make sure this person stayed down. As I mentioned before, the Viking fear of the dead rising from their graves was real. This particular person scared everyone so much that dying is not considered a good enough guarantee, so they crushed them with rocks and pinned them to the earth with a stake, just to feel safe at night. These got called vampire burials by modern researchers, and similar burials have been found in other parts of Europe as well. Cleopatra and Mark Antony are about as famous as it gets from the ancient world, and everyone just assumes there's some massive tomb out there for them somewhere. Ancient Roman writers say they were buried together after they both died in 30 BCE, but nobody's ever found it, which is honestly kind of insane. These were two of the biggest names in history, and yet nothing's ever turned up. For over 20 years, an archaeologist named Kathleen Martinez has been digging around a temple site called Taposiris Magna near Alexandria in northwest Egypt. Her team found coins with Cleopatra's face on them and tunnels running thousands of feet underground. Then in 2025, she teamed up with Bob Ballard, the same guy who found the Titanic, and they found a sunken ancient port that dates back to Cleopatra's time. That harbor might have been how bodies were transported from the Nile into the temple area, but even with all that, the coins, the tunnels, everything, no actual tomb has ever been found that anyone can point to and say, that's them. Some researchers think the burial is somewhere underwater, under old Alexandria. Others think it's buried deep at Taposiris Magna. Either way, over 2,000 years later, we still have no idea where two of the most famous people who ever lived are actually buried. The Great Sphinx is one of the most recognizable things ever built, and it might be most famous for something that's missing: its nose. That nose has been gone for centuries, and people still argue about what happened to it. The most popular story is that Napoleon's soldiers shot it off with a cannon. Almost certainly not true. There are drawings of the Sphinx from the 1600s and 1700s that already show no nose, and Napoleon didn't show up until the late 1700s. The explanation that gets thrown around the most comes from a historian named Al-Markizi, who wrote about it in the 1400s. He said that back in the 1300s, a man named Muhammad Saim al-Dar saw locals leaving offerings at the Sphinx, trying to get good crops and rain, and he thought it was idol worship. So he reportedly had the nose chiseled off to put a stop to it, but even that's not 100% confirmed. There's no clear, definitive answer. In 1936, archaeologists digging at Saqqara, a big burial site south of Cairo, cracked open a tomb belonging to a man named Sabu and found something that's still a mystery to this day. A flat stone disc with a hole in the center and 3 curved spokes. Kind of looks like a giant stone hubcap or a weird propeller. It's been dubbed the Sabu disc, and nothing else from that era looks anything like it. The disc is about 5,000 years old, older than the Step Pyramid, older than most of the big monuments people think of when they think of ancient Egypt, but nobody knows what this thing was for. It's made of really brittle stone, except there are no signs of wear, so it probably wasn't used as a regular tool. Some archaeologists think it was a ritual object of some kind or a container. People outside mainstream academia have gone further, saying it might have been part of some kind of mechanical device, but nothing else like it has ever been found from the same time and place. It's completely one of a kind, so We still have no real answer. Most Egyptian pyramids can be tied to a specific pharaoh, like Khufu with the Great Pyramid. But out at Saqqara, just south of the Step Pyramid, there's another pyramid from somewhere around 1800 to 1650 BCE, and nobody knows who built it. Archaeologists call it the Southern South Saqqara Pyramid. It's clearly ancient, clearly royal, but there's no name on it. Researchers found an elaborate underground chamber and stone fragments that all point to royal construction, but no name inscription anywhere. Which is strange, because Egyptian kings basically always made sure their name was carved all over their stuff. In 2008, an Egyptologist named Christopher Diaz suggested it might belong to a ruler named Dahuti based on nearby fragments, but that's not widely accepted. The pyramid also never got its smooth outer casing stones finished, and parts of it look like construction just abruptly stopped one day, and that would actually fit the time period, the 13th dynasty. During this time, Egypt's central government was breaking down, and kings had really short reigns, so building projects kept getting left unfinished. In 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II invaded Egypt. At some point, he sent an army of around 50,000 soldiers across the western desert. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, that army never made it. A massive sandstorm supposedly swallowed all of them. The men, the camels, all their weapons, everything. And that was it. People have been chasing this story for centuries. In the 1930s, a British officer named Ord Wingate went out searching the desert for bones or equipment, and he came back with nothing. In the 80s, teams from Harvard and National Geographic found old burial mounds and traces of settlements, but nothing that could be definitively linked to the army. And more recently, Egyptian archaeologists found cloth fragments, possible weapons parts, and human bones buried deep in the desert, hundreds of miles west of the Nile. Some people think it might be connected, but there's still no solid proof. There's no mass grave or like a pile of weapons, nothing that clearly says that this is them. Deep under the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent in Mexico, archaeologists spent years painstakingly clearing a sealed tunnel. In 2015, they hit something they were never expecting to find, a massive deposit of liquid mercury sitting at the end of the corridor. A shimmering metallic pool that had been designed to look like a supernatural river. The lead archaeologist, Sergio Gomez, immediately went on the record warning that nobody should be near this stuff without full-body hazardous material suits and respirators. Liquid mercury is a neurotoxin that emits these odorless vapors that'll destroy the nervous system. If you breathe it in, you're looking at permanent brain damage, tremors, and eventually a complete system shutdown. So why was this here? The theory is that the ancient people of Teotihuacan used the mercury to represent an underworld river, creating a kind of forbidden zone for the living. Because the tunnel was sealed for nearly 1800 years though, the concentration of toxic fumes inside was lethal. Even today, the excavation is strictly controlled because the soil is just saturated with the metal. Next on the list is the Delhi Purple Sapphire. This artifact is currently sitting in a vault at the Natural History Museum in London, but for a long time, the people who owned it wished that they'd never come across it. It's not actually a sapphire, it's a massive amethyst that was looted from the Temple of Indra in India during the Indian Mutiny of 1857. A cavalry officer named W. Ferris brought it to England, and almost as soon as he arrived, his life took a turn for the worst. He lost his health, his money, and his family suffered a string of bizarre accidents. He eventually gave the stone to his son, who suffered the almost exact same streak of bad luck. The most famous owner was a writer named Edward Heron Allen. He was a man of science, but after several of his friends went through bouts of bad luck or just straight up died after handling the stone, he got terrified. So he tried to get rid of it by throwing it into a canal, only for a dredger to find it and return it to him months later. Heron Allen eventually packed the amethyst into 7 different boxes, surrounded it with lucky charms, and left instructions that should stay locked away until 33 years after his death. He warned that the stone was, quote, cursed and stained with blood. In 1973, a group of researchers in Poland decided to open the tomb of King Casimir IV Jagiellon. People at the time joking about the curse of the pharaohs, but the scientists were scientists. They didn't believe in curses, and even if there was some kind of dangerous mold in there, modern medicine would protect them from it, surely. But they were wrong. Within days of opening it, 4 of the 12 researchers were dead. Shortly after that, more members of the team started falling ill with mysterious lung infections and organ failure. In the end, nearly everyone who'd entered the tomb or handled the king's remains had suffered some form of serious health problem. Microbiologists eventually found that the tomb was a breeding ground for a specific fungus called Aspergillus flavus. When a tomb is sealed for hundreds and hundreds of years, like this one was, certain molds can evolve into highly concentrated toxic strains. So as soon as the researchers cracked the seal, they just inhaled a massive cloud of invisible spores that, and this is really disgusting, but they started eating their lungs from the inside out. So that's why nowadays, when archaeologists open a royal tomb or a sealed crypt of some kind, they wear a heavy-duty respirator. Back in 1785, archaeologists dug up a gold ring in a field in England. It's an undeniably ancient-looking thing, kind of bulky with a rough face carved into it. For a long time, people just thought it was an old Roman artifact, but then another discovery completely changed how people looked at it. Miles away from where the ring was found, researchers turned up what's called a cursed tablet at an ancient temple. It was left by a guy named Sylvanus. He specifically called out the ring's owner by name, a man named Senecanius. The message basically asked the god Nodens to destroy Senecanius' health and peace of mind until he returned the ring to the temple. But it went even further than that. The tablet also warned anyone who came across the ring that it was stolen property and that whoever was wearing it was already marked for death. In 1929, an archaeologist named Mortimer Wheeler was trying to piece together the link between the ring and the cursed. He needed someone who understood the old mythology behind it, so he brought in a friend to help. And that friend was J.R.R. Tolkien. So this actual Roman ring, supposedly cursed and worn by someone essentially condemned, was a huge inspiration behind the One Ring in Lord of the Rings. The Black Prince's Ruby. This sits right in the middle of the British crown jewels, and it looks incredible, this massive deep red stone, but its history is basically just a long line of people dying violently. The stone was taken off a dead prince in 14th century Spain. The man who took it, Peter the Cruel, was warned straight away that it was tainted, brought betrayal to everyone who owned it. He didn't listen, and eventually he was slain by his own brother. Passed to an English nobleman known as the Black Prince, who died a slow and painful death from disease not long after. The stone kept moving, and it kept turning up at the worst moments for whoever had it. Henry V wore it in his helmet at the Battle of Agincourt. Someone hit him with a battle axe hard enough to crack the helmet open. Henry barely survived. Richard III had it on him when he died in battle. Today, it's mounted in the Imperial State Crown, behind thick glass in the Tower of London, with armed guards around it. The rock runestone in Sweden has the longest runic inscription ever found anywhere in the world. For a long time, people assumed it was hero myths, old poetry. Interesting, but nothing more than that. But when researchers really looked into it, what they found was completely different. It's more of a warning. The text talks about the sun disappearing and crops dying, which is what Vikings called Fimbul Winter, brutal, endless winter that they believed would come right before Ragnarok. Basically the end times. And scientists have been able to confirm that right around the time this stone was carved, there was this string of huge volcanic eruptions that went off around the world, and the temperature in Scandinavia had dropped. Yeah, even more than usual. That would have been awful. The sky darkened, crops would have failed, a massive portion of the population starved or froze to death. The people living through it genuinely believed the world was ending because, from where they were standing, kinda was. In Norway, a woman was found buried in a boat. That part is normal. Boat burials were an honorable way to go in Viking culture. What wasn't normal were the large scallop shells that had been jammed into her mouth. Nothing like this exists anywhere else in the Viking record, not even close. The shells didn't seem to be decorative, they were forced in there, and in a lot of ancient cultures, forcibly closing the mouth of a dead person usually meant they were trying to keep them quiet, or stopping the spirit from speaking, or stopping something from getting back in through the body. Because this doesn't match anything else we know from Norse culture, though, nobody's been able to fully explain it. This was either some very rare ritual, or maybe even just a single specific case. The Snøldev stone was found in Denmark, dates back to around the 800s. At first glance, it doesn't look that intense. It's just a rune stone with a short inscription saying it was raised for a man named Gunvalder, who was the son of Hraldr. Pretty standard Viking memorial, but then you notice the symbols carved into it. There's a set of 3 interlocked drinking horns, what people now call the triple horn of Odin. In Norse stories, these horns are tied to the mead of poetry, which is all about wisdom, status, and power. Probably meant the person buried here had some kind of importance. While the stone doesn't actually have a curse written on it, people often treat it like it does. That idea comes from other Viking runestones that did include warnings, mixed with the fact that Odin really wasn't seen as a calm or forgiving god, so over time it's turned into something else. Not just a memorial, but something that feels like it carries some ominous weight. The Sullaby runestone in Sweden doesn't threaten you with death or curses or divine punishment. It goes after something that for a Viking was arguably worse. The inscription says that anyone who breaks the stone will be shunned and dishonored. One of the specific words on the stone is rata, which, similar to Arger, seemed to carry real weight. It's been translated to mean a wretch, outcast, or warlock, and not warlock in the sense that you'd gain magical powers, more that you'd be considered abnormal, a freak. To understand why this was so important, you have to understand what reputation meant in Viking society. Sure, you had an afterlife with Valhalla, but what was considered super important after you died was your name, what people said about it. Your reputation was your legacy, so being called a rata wasn't just embarrassing, it meant your name would be spoken with contempt. Not just now, but by the generations that came after. For a warrior, that kind of social death, that was the threat that actually kept them up at night. The Osberg ship burial in Norway is one of the most famous Viking discoveries ever made. Incredibly preserved, beautifully crafted, clearly the resting place of someone of very high status. And somewhere inside the structure of that ship, hidden in a spot where no one would ever see it unless they were actively taking the ship apart, someone carved 2 words into a small piece of wood. Rather than butchering the language, I'll just say the translation, man knows little. It wasn't meant to be read by mourners or visitors. It was a place and a spot that would only be reached by someone disturbing the burial, which means it was left specifically for people like, well, the archaeologists who eventually found it. This story goes back to 15th century Italy. A silver vase was given to a young bride as a wedding gift. That same night, she was found dead, still clutching it. After that, the vase disappeared for hundreds of years. It turned up at an auction in 1988. When someone opened it, there was a handwritten note inside that said, "Beware, this vase brings death." The man who brought it ignored that and was dead within 3 months. The family sold it to a pharmacist who also died shortly after, and now the thing had a bit of a reputation. People tried donating it to museums just to get it out of their hands, and every museum refused. Nobody wanted this thing. Eventually, the Italian police got involved, and since they couldn't find a home for it, they reportedly put it in a lead-lined box and buried it somewhere. Tikal is one of the most visited ancient sites in the world. Tourists go constantly to see the Maya pyramids, but archaeologists started getting sick after spending time in the deeper chambers. For a while, nobody could work out why. But when they finally tested the air and the surfaces, they found unsafely high levels of mercury. The source, the paint on the walls. See, the Maya were obsessed with the color red. It represented life and the BLOOD of their gods. The mineral they used to get that deep red was called cinnabar. The problem is that cinnabar is mercury sulfide. They coated their walls with it, their pottery, even the bodies of their dead. Over 1,000 years later, that paint is broken down into this fine dust that covers every surface in those chambers. So breathe it in or touch the wrong wall, you could end up with mercury poisoning. This limestone statue was carved in Cyprus around 3500 BCE. It's officially known as the Woman from Lem's statue, but some call it the Goddess of Death, and the history behind it makes that pretty easy to understand. It was discovered in the late 1800s. The first owner was a man named Lord Elfont. Within 7 years of bringing it home, every member of this dude's family was dead, all 7 of them. The next owner, Ivor Manouchi, lost his entire family within 4 years. The third owner had a nearly identical experience. And by the time it reached a 4th owner, Sir Noel Thompson, the stories were well known. He was aware of everything that had happened to the people before him. His wife and 2 daughters still died after the statue came into his home. Surviving sons, not wanting to find out what had happened next, donated it to the Royal Scottish Museum in Edinburgh. The museum placed it in a display case. The curator, who handled the installation, died shortly after. It's still there today behind thick glass. You can go see it if you'd ever want to, but the staff and historians who studied it are generally in the same agreement that it should stay exactly where it is. Uluru is this huge sandstone rock sitting in the middle of Australia. The Anangu people have considered it sacred for thousands of years, and their message to visitors has always been, don't take the rocks. If you do, things won't go well for you. Well, for years, tourists have ignored that and took stones home as souvenirs. But packages started arriving. The Park Service receives returned rocks every single week from people all over the world. They're called sari rocks, and they almost always come with a letter. The letters describe the same kinds of things: car accidents, illnesses, marriages falling apart, financial problems, all seeming to start around the time the person took the rock. Returning the rock may seem like a small gesture, but this is Australia. Shipping something down there, it ain't cheap, but people are so desperate to undo their bad luck that they will pay it. And in a similar story, in 1995, someone stole 2 large round stones from an archaeological site in Israel called Gamla. They were Roman ballista stones, which were heavy ammunition used in ancient catapults. These ones were from a siege in 67 CE, where a massive number of people were killed. For 20 years after they were taken, nobody knew where they went. But then they just showed up, left in a bag in the courtyard of an Israeli museum with a typed note inside. The person who took them wrote about what the 2 decades since had looked like for them. Their business had completely failed, their family had left, they described a constant feeling of impending doom, and what did they blame it on? The stones, of course. They said the stones had brought them nothing but trouble, and that they were cursed by the blood of everyone who died at Gamla. When Howard Carter's team opened Tutankhamun's tomb in November of 1922, it set off one of the most persistent legends in history: the idea that messing with a pharaoh's burial will get you killed. The famous phrase, "death will come on swift wings," isn't actually written anywhere in the tomb, but that didn't stop newspapers worldwide from going crazy with it. A death that really got the ball rolling was Lord Carnarvon, the man who paid for the whole expedition. He died from a nasty infection just months after the tomb was opened, and the press immediately blamed the curse. And after that, anytime someone connected to the dig got sick or had something bad happen to them, it got added to the list. Visitors, scientists, even a canary apparently didn't survive. Ancient writers used to mention a major Egyptian port city called Thonis Heraklion, a huge trading hub where ships from all over the Mediterranean came to dock, with massive temples built for the gods. But by the time Europeans were poking around Egypt in the 17 and 1800s, the city was nowhere, but it completely vanished. Turns out it was now underwater. In the late 90s and early 2000s, a French archaeologist named Frank Gaudiot and his team found the whole city sitting at the bottom of Abu Qir Bay near Alexandria. Massive stone columns, huge statues, long causeways and temples. Hundreds of shipwrecks, all of it was just sitting there underwater, thousands of years after the city went under. So what happened? Researchers think it wasn't one single disaster, but a bunch of things piling up. The ground under the city was soft sediment. When earthquakes hit, and ancient writers did record tremors and tidal waves in the area, well, that soft ground could basically turn to mush. There's a process called liquefaction, where the earth just acts like quicksand under a heavy load. At the same time, sea levels were rising and floods kept pushing water inland, so over time, the city just slid into the bay. Exactly how fast it happened, researchers are still working that out. There's a chance that there's something hidden under the Great Sphinx. Back in the early 90s, seismic surveys around the Sphinx picked up an anomaly beneath the front paws. That started a whole conversation about hidden chambers or underground rooms. The technology works by sending energy waves into the ground, reading what comes back. And in those readings, something under the front of the Sphinx was responding differently from the rock around it. Some researchers said it could be a void or a chamber. Others said it's probably just a natural cavity, just the way the rock happens to be formed. Nobody's actually gone under there to look. Part of that's because the Sphinx is old and fragile, and nobody wants to damage it chasing an anomaly on a graph. So it might be something, it might be nothing. Until someone actually checks properly, it stays a mystery. In 2015, Egyptian and Czech archaeologists digging at the Abu Sir necropolis, a big cemetery southwest of Cairo, found the tomb of a queen. The inscription said she was both a wife of the king and a mother of the king. You'd think that would be enough to figure out who she was, but it wasn't. She wasn't named the typical way, and her inscriptions didn't match any queen already in the historical record. Her titles and the style of the tomb made clear that she was royalty, and because the tomb was right next to the funeral complex of Pharaoh Neferefre, who ruled around 4,500 years ago, most people think that she was his wife and the mother of his heir. Archaeologists have given her a working name, Khentkaus III, based on what the inscriptions do say, but beyond that, her story is basically gone. Was she powerful in her own right? Did she rule as a regent for a younger king? Who was her son? The layout of the tomb and the artifacts inside help with dating and show that she was important, but nothing actually tells her story. Right near the causeway connecting the Sphinx and Khafre's pyramid at Giza, there's a deep hole in the ground that almost nobody ever sees. It's called the Osiris Shaft. It's been known for nearly 100 years, but we still don't really understand what it was built for. An archaeologist named Salim Hassan first documented it in the 1930s, but the lower sections were completely flooded, and pumping them out didn't really work. It wasn't until the late 90s and early 2000s that Zahi Hawass and his team finally drained it enough to get down there and explore. And what they found was this whole network of shafts, chambers, and tunnels cut straight down into solid bedrock, almost 30 meters deep. The upper levels are pretty plain, but the middle layer opens into a chamber with massive stone coffins. Interestingly, some of those coffins are made from rock that doesn't come from Egypt, so that raises some questions. Zahi Hawass has said the design reflects Osiris's mythical underworld. It was likely a place where religious ceremonies took place, but nobody agrees on when it was first built. Most of the objects found inside date to Egypt's late period, around 664 to 525 BCE, but there are also fragments of much older pottery that might go all the way back to the Old Kingdom, which would mean the shaft was used long before anyone officially excavated it.